Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming to our session today. Don't forget cultural movement building. We are about to start in just a minute or so, but in order to get into the mood and really set the tone for today, we'd love to hear your stories to the questions that you see on screen. Number one, what was your most recent memorable night out? Whether it be in the club, in the bar, maybe a public park. What really has moved you when you are in New York City and need a point of respite? And what city were you in? It doesn't have to be New York City. What was the venue? What did the space feel like? We hear from you. What did the community feel like to you? So we are about to start, but please go ahead and add your stories in, and we will love to read it and kind of get started. All right. All right, thanks for coming, everyone. We're going to go ahead and start with a quick presentation just to kind of set some ground rules and set a foundation for what we're going to talk today. Amazing panel lined up for you today. Like heavy hitters from every point of the nightlife community, from policy to activists, our owners, founders themselves. So we really hope that you'll stick with us through the end. We're going to start with a presentation in just a second, and then we'll toss it over to our moderator, Eli Fortkin, who is the editorial director of First Center for Urban Future, and we'll hopefully leave some time for Q&A. All right, Tara, I am ready to start. You're ready.
I am ready.
Awesome. And that is my amazing co-facilitator, co-producer, co-friend, co-conspirator. We've been planning this event for a really long time. So shout outs to Tara, DJ Tara, also urban planner extraordinaire. So welcome to the night, Cultural Movement Building. This is a panel to talk together activists, advocates, and business owners themselves to really talk about how night space and nightlife is cultural movements and why it's important for us to protect it going forward. You can go next slide. So why nightlife? Back then, early the 20th century, saloons were actually one of the most important fields of study for the industrial city. Nightlife spaces gave us an insight into marginalized groups that people usually push but not limited to dancers, sex workers, the poor, Latinx folks, and even upper class and middle class communities, mainly in industrial and manufacturing. But since the 90s, urban bars and clubs have been post-industrial, and we've noticed economic shifts that have really regenerated downtowns, and nightlife has been at the center of that. Okay, next slide. So why now? In New York City, nightlife creates over 30,000 jobs. That's $2.8 billion in wages and $13.7 billion in economic output. A lot of money, a lot of time, and so it deserves a little bit of attention. And what we look to the future, with next slide, is rather than taking a straight evaluation approach, we see it for what it is, a community that catalyzes participation, it stops displacement, and really serves as community anchors depending on which bars you're at. And that also creates cultural and equitable wealth and mobility for folks who don't see themselves in the regular workforce, who are not 9-to-5ers, who are artists, or people who just need a job. So before COVID, it was sorry.
Sorry, my slides keep jumping. Sorry, this is where we are. Sorry about that. So again, as the DJ, I figured I just wanted to give just to demonstrate how the history of nightlife, specifically in New York City, lines up with a lot of cultural movements throughout, I guess, the last 100 years. You know, in the 1920s, this is when the New York City Cabaret law was introduced. It controlled where and how entertainment and music venues operated, actively prohibiting jazz clubs in Black neighborhoods or neighborhoods in general. The law was a catch-all regulation that prohibited dancing in many spaces, making any social space with music and dancing illegal in certain parts of the city. And then moving into the 1960s through the 1980s with the civil rights movement, the gay liberation movement, you had a lot of traditional sounds evolving and new genres emerging at the time that these movements were growing. And then in the 70s and 80s to now, you have, this is where I guess many people believe that New York City nightlife was at its peak, which I hope is not the case because I wasn't too young. But this also fostered hip hop, which originated in New York City, house music, which originated in Chicago, and techno, which originated in Detroit, all by Black and Latinx people. In the 1990s in New York City, there were government crackdowns targeting nightlife under Mayor Giuliani's quality of life policing through crackdowns and raids. And that kind of takes us into today, where even though there are a lot of gentrifications and rezonings that are happening, which further limit nightlife proliferation in New York City. Nightlife businesses are not always considered a legitimate constituent of public interest. And to this day, there has been no movement by city planning to consider changing the zoning text for the betterment of nightlife businesses. And then also with the gentrification that's happening in New York City by wealthier residents who consider bars and clubs to be a nuisance, it's also a challenge in inciting these businesses in certain neighborhoods because they're seen as a nuisance. So there is a conflict between culture and quality of life, but there really doesn't need to be. Sorry, my slide, okay.
All right, so that brings us to where about 11 months ago. So before it happened, we knew this was an issue. Over 20% of New York City nightlife venues closed their doors in the past 15 years. So rising real estate prices, zoning pressures, increasing costs, complaints, and of course gentrification. This is a serious issue that we should all pay attention to for nightlife business, but even more so for those owned and managed by Black, Indigenous, and persons of color. And that's who we will have speaking to this issue today. And so that means that BIPOC and marginalized populations are also more likely to be vulnerable to illegal harassment that leads to displacement. We're definitely keeping an eye on this during, the eviction, pending danger throughout this year due to COVID. And next. So here's a quick look at the zoning configurations. So pre-1980 is on the left, and 1978, you can really see that social dancing basically allowed as a right in the lighter gray color. But as we moved over to 1990, you see that really dark color. That is where you need special permits, and that's where the cabaret law has been triggered. So basically, just within a span of 2 decades, dancing has been heavily regulated. Next slide. And so as of February 2020, an independent music and events website, Resident Advisor, reported over 1,800 open venues in New York City. But as of right now, nearly none are open, or if they are, they're operating at 15% capacity and have to, find a way to either open outdoors or safely. So we really don't know the number that are actually closed. Go ahead. So in addition to more regulations, dancing, these little purple indicate where there's dancing is legal. So in theory, there shouldn't be any bars or clubs or any allowed dancing anywhere else but other than Use Group 12 and in C4, C6, C8, and so on. So even so, our bar owners today can kind of speak to how this impacts them on their daily operations. And we can go next. And so that's not the only. There's also been intense raids that have happened to our nightlife community. If you might have heard of this as the March raids, from 2012 to 2017, there's hundreds of raids right here in New York City, and you can see that the impacted neighborhoods is Southern Manhattan, Crown Heights, Ridgewood, and even parts of the Bronx. And Anna, who will be on our panel today to kind of speak to this, has been impacted by these raids. As we move into COVID times, there's a new task force that is also enforcing, so we'll cover that as well. Go next. You can go ahead, Tara.
All right. So effectively, nightlife closed down globally in March 2020. Since then, a group of nightlife workers, advocates, planners, and other practitioners have convened to create a guide for recovery. This is called the Global Nightlife Recovery Plan. The website is in the corner, but we'll also put it in the chat. It's being rolled out chapter by chapter. It addresses things such as design, nightlife communications, things of that sort. One of our panelists has also been involved in this global recovery plan. And right now you can check out that website, and the first 3 chapters are up and there are a few more to go. I'm actually working on a forthcoming chapter that's specifically addressing and what we've done so far, what they're experiencing and what policy recommendations can be implemented to help them. We did a survey among all types of nightlife workers worldwide, and we found that nightlife workers have either not received financial relief during the pandemic, or the relief received is not sufficient for them to survive. Cash and rent assistance ranks as a top need. And mental health concerns are also mounting due to the pandemic. There's anxiety and depression due to no work and income. And we also know that venues are in a similar situation. Aside from the payment protection program loans, nightlife venues have also received little to no aid. So we wanted to put this quote in because we thought that it was very apropos given what's happening now with nightlife, that artists are the first responders to the world's ills. What we've seen now is that even though the spaces are not open physically, that they've moved on to the virtual realm. And people have, there's been a lot of resource sharing and mutual aid, emergency funds and grants that have been created, crowdfunding for nightlife staff, Bandcamp Fridays to support independent musicians and DJs who create original music. There have been virtual events where venues and performers are creating events together to earn money, but as well as to share information and build awareness around a lot of the actions that have happened over this summer. And nightlife communities are also doing virtual fundraisers for groups such as Black Lives Matter and the Okra Project for the girls, various Black and trans groups as well. So the normal challenges that come with owning a nightlife business are now compounded with the current and uncertain times presented during COVID-19. So the question we want to ask and answer hopefully here is, how do we move forward as we prepare to rebuild? This is another quote that we wanted to throw in here because just thinking about the added challenge of opening a nightlife space, a space like Nowadays, which is located in Ridgewood, New York, is no different than a Dwayne Reed when we're out there in the real world, negotiating a lease, paying our taxes, paying our employees, just running our business. But obviously we're very different from a Dwayne Reed when it comes to our societal impact, and which is why Mariah and I really wanted to put forth this panel discussion because we personally understand and feel the importance of nightlife in New York and worldwide. So we are going to now move over and introduce our moderator, Eli Dvorkin, who is the Editorial and Policy Director at the Center for an Urban Future. So we will now move over to the panel discussion and we will stop sharing the screen. And thank you all for attending.
Thank you so much, Tara. That was really great. Thank you everybody for tuning in and to our amazing panelists. Let me quickly introduce them and then we'll
Oops.
Yeah.
A little, you're muted.
I think you're odd. We can't hear you.
Can people hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Still
For some
no.
reason, still can't hear you. You're not muted, but we can't hear you.
Give me 1 second. I'm going to rejoin.
Okay, he's going to re-enter the room. Oh, now, okay, someone can hear him. That's weird. All right, he'll be re-entering the room shortly. Okay.
Hey again, can folks hear me? Yes, fantastic. Okay. This is the new reality. If it doesn't work, just try it again. Well, I'm so happy to be here with all of you. Thank you so much for everyone tuning in and to all of our amazing panelists. There's so much to talk about. Let's just get right into it. But first, let me briefly introduce our panel. First of all, I'm Eli Dvorkin from the Center for an Urban Future. If you don't know us, we're a nonprofit think tank research organization focused on expanding economic opportunity in New York. You can check out all of our work at nycfuture.org. We're joined today by some amazing panelists, including Adi Salau, who's the founder of Party Blackly, a grassroots media and event platform, as well as a math education consultant, a musician, an activist, lots of other hats, and somehow with all this time to appear on panels. So welcome, Adi, great to have you. We're also joined by Rafael Espinal, who's the executive director of the Freelancers Union, the largest and fastest growing organization representing independent workers in the country. And of course, Rafael was also previously a member of the New York City Council, where he earned a reputation as a leading champion for the city's nightlife culture. Welcome, Rafael. We're joined as well by Ariel Palitz. Ariel is the first senior executive director of the Office of Nightlife, better known to some of us as the Night Mayor, a new role within the Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment. She previously owned and operated Sutra on the Lower East Side and served on Community Board 3, where she helped bridge the gaps between nightlife venues and community concerns. We're joined as well by Diana Mora. Diana is the owner of Friends and Lovers, a beloved nightlife venue in Brooklyn. I'll editorialize a little bit and call it beloved. I think that's fair to say. She's a co-founder of New York City Nightlife United as well, which is raising funds and mobilizing support for the city's small independent venues, as well as the artists and producers and employees that bring those spaces to life. And last, but certainly not least, we're joined as well by Marva Babel, who co-owns Prospect Heights venue Ode to Babel with her twin sister. The space quickly gained popularity in recent years as both a bar and a lounge, and really as a community hub with a focus on celebrating Brooklyn's Black creative community. So thank you all so much for being with us today. And just so everybody knows who's tuning in, you can ask questions of our panelists in the chat. If you hit the chat button and click on session, leave your questions there. I will go through them in the second half of this conversation, and we'll get to as many questions as we possibly can. So kicking things off, I mean, we heard so much from that initial presentation about the role of nightlife in the city's economy and cultural life, and obviously how much it's hurting today. And just to add a little more context to that, we know right now that nightlife is reeling. Employment is down 40% in restaurants and bars from the same time last year. It's down 72% in the performing arts, the steepest drop of any industry in the city's economy. And that's just a piece of what makes the nighttime economy tick. And at the same time, so many of the New Yorkers who've been disproportionately harmed by the health and economic impact of this crisis, including immigrants and Black and Latinx New Yorkers and queer New Yorkers, among many others, are also those who found refuge in the community that nightlife creates. And now that whole ecosystem is under severe threat. So just to get things started, let's start with what that looks like at the ground level. And we're really lucky to have two folks who have created venues and spaces joining us on this panel, Marva and Deanna. I'd like to start with you. And Deanna, why don't you tell us a little bit about the nightlife space that you run, Friends and Lovers, and so many other spaces. We're really facing huge challenges even before this crisis hit. But right now, this era is testing nightlife in just unprecedented ways. So what's been the hardest about operating a venue in this time? And what's working better than you might have expected? Oh, Deanna, I think you are also muted for the moment, but we'd love to hear what you have to say.
I'm back.
Perfect.
Okay. I mean, it's all been very hard. I don't know what's been easy. I mean, right now at this point, we're still closed, and we have attempted to slowly reopen with us focusing on a creative co-working and cocktails spot starting next week. What's been easy is just people are just so willing to support that it's forced us to really get creative to open sooner than later because the overwhelming support is there. So we're just trying to now also accommodate a real consumer need, which is your apartment's too small, you have to get out, come here, come hang out with us, let's do something. I've got this empty space, like let me make it useful. But as far as the baseline, it's expensive to be closed. It costs a lot. The rent still, I'm still accountable for the rent. I'm still accountable for certain operating costs. So it's tricky, and it's been really disheartening just kind of seeing what's been happening. The best part is just the unification of nightlife and just everyone just trying to prop each other up. And I think that's really beautiful, because by default, we've always been fragmented because we're just battling everything by ourselves. So now, for the first time, I've seen like more people just kind of standing together. And if that can continue post-COVID, I think we can do a lot.
Thanks, Deanna. Marvin, why don't you tell us a little bit more about, what's the day-to-day looking like for you all at this point? And has it changed since the depths of April, and where are things today?
For us, I kind of wanted to piggyback off what Deanna said. For sure, definitely, we were challenged even before COVID. And then when COVID hit, it was even harder. Obviously, not just running a business, but the uncertainty that was thrown at us and still thrown at us as of yesterday from our state and city officials. So the day-to-day is almost going day to day as a business owner, whereas, running a business, you try to plan with, the right amount of time, but that's all out the window. We literally have to go day by day, figuring out, will there be any new rules, any new guidelines? I check Twitter, check the news regularly to see what's new, because that's how we're getting information as small business owners. And then wearing the hat that is communication to our staffing and to our patrons of what it looks like that day, whether it's new hours, whether it's rain, whether it's whatever it's down the pipeline. And then dealing with that on top of just staffing and making sure people are, still getting paid, because we need to really hold them to have something to offer them, say set hours or set whatever, schedule they have for themselves. So it's just it's a challenge on top of a normal business challenge for us with those things in place. So right now our day-to-day is just kind of figuring it out as we go. It's building the parachute as we go down this hill. We just don't know what it looks like, and trying our best to go with the flow, if you will. So
thanks, Mara. Well, Ariel, let me bring into this conversation as well. I mean, in part because I know you're hearing from venue owners every single day. In part because maybe you may have some new thoughts about our colleague on the panel, Raphael, who created this position. I can only imagine that when you signed up for this role, you didn't have a global pandemic in mind in terms of what you do. And frankly, there were so many challenges things to the nightlife economy for this crisis, and now you've stepped into a role where there's so many new challenges to deal with. I think at the same time, a lot of folks maybe have the perception that we're sitting here in New York waiting on the federal government to act. We're waiting on a stimulus package. We're waiting on relief, the Save Our Stages Act, a real bailout. So much of the city's future in some ways feels like it hinges on that federal response. But I'm here as someone who thinks all day, every day about city and state policy to kind of push in the direction of, well, what more can we do on the local level? And so, I'd like to get your sense of, at this point in the pandemic, how you see New York City's response to this crisis when it comes to nightlife venues, when it comes to workers in the nighttime economy. How would you rate New York City's response so far? And, what more is needed right now?
Okay, I'm unmuted. Well, thank you, Eli. Appreciate being here very much for the opportunity to speak on this topic. And needless to say, I'm extremely grateful to Raphael Espinal, who created this position so many years ago to make sure that this industry has a seat at the table in the government where decisions are being made every single day, and to make sure that the industry is not forgotten, that its industries and concerns are being heard, and that the pain that it's going through right now is being communicated. I'm extremely grateful that we were established when we did. Again, this is the first of its kind. This office didn't exist before. And so pre-COVID, we were really here to set the foundation and the infrastructure and the relationships and set the priorities. And as you had mentioned before, I come to this position not as a politician, but as a former nightclub owner. I grew up in New York. I was a promoter back in the day. And so it was, I think, really important, not only to me, but to the industry to know that somebody who has experienced what it means to operate is in the position now to represent them. And although the position was created pre-COVID, and yes, none of us could have foreseen this experience that we're in. And very often people would joke, oh, you're here to save nightlife. And now, it's that sort of has elevated to an even more real feeling and sense of what that means. But I feel like the vision that Raphael had and the purpose of this office and the other 50 offices of nightlife that there are around the world that contribute to the global plan that you're speaking about, we are still fulfilling that original purpose that Raphael had, which is to make sure that nightlife and hospitality is represented every day, and that not only are we amplifying and delivering the message that we hear every day to the highest seats of government where decisions are being made, and that it is not forgotten, and that we are part of the decision making as best as we can within the bandwidth that we have to make sure that it's realistic and makes sense and is supportive as best as we can, but that we also are here in the middle as a liaison to get the information that is coming down when it comes down, at whatever pace it comes, but to make sure that we are delivering it to those that need it the most. And so it is obviously an extraordinarily complicated situation. And I think for the most part, we're all just doing the best that we can to answer your question about how the city is doing. I think comparatively, New York is doing pretty well, have been doing pretty well. Up until essentially yesterday, we've kept our numbers pretty low. We stood up the outdoor dining program essentially overnight and got rid of a lot of the bureaucracy that usually takes 6 months to do so. 11 outdoor dining areas. Of course, we know it does not address the 27,000 venues, that we have, and many who have not opened. But, we are also here to advocate for Save Our Stages and to make sure that ultimately the federal dollars are coming down, because this Office of Nightlife is not one that is able to deliver ultimately the finances that this industry needs, but we can advocate to government that it is absolutely essential and a lifesaver that it does.
Thank you for that. I think it brings up several important issues, including some of the issues that were at stake, I think, when and Raphael, correct me if I'm wrong, but when you conceived of this office in the first place, as well as some new issues that maybe are coming to the fore because of the way that this crisis is exacerbating so many inequalities in our society today. But Raphael, let me bring you on this point as well. I mean, thinking about your current perch, running the Freelancers Union, representing so many of independent and freelance workers across the country, many of whom are in the arts, many of whom are in the nighttime economy. And I'm curious from your perspective, what's happening to the nighttime workforce right now? What are they experiencing? What's missing in terms of the policy response to actually support people that were previously employed in this nightlife economy? What would you want to see the city and state do differently to help ensure that part of our city's economy can recover equitably?
Yeah, well, thank you, Eli, and thank you for having me alongside all these great people who have been doing amazing work in our city, not only in government, but on the ground, providing these amazing spaces so that New York City's cultural nightlife can continue thriving. Before I hit your point, I really just want to talk about what was being talked about by Ariel, and it's, nightlife was already facing a lot of challenges. What we're seeing this pandemic do is really exacerbate a problem that has not been dealt with historically by the city or state of New York. When you talk about real estate, people are already underwater on the cost of rent of keeping the business alive. When we talk about over enforcement, there's a lot of venues that we're dealing with, all these different city agencies that were coming in, ticketing them for minuscule problems instead of trying to figure out a way in which they can be able to solve those problems before getting and at the end of the day getting a fine. That was what drove me to want to create this Office of Nightlife, so that advocate can exist. Ariel has been doing that job really well. So I feel that with her leadership, we'll be able to get out through this mess with the solutions. But the bigger problem and the reason why the city is having a tough time reacting and being that helping hand is because the federal government throughout this entire pandemic has done so little to give the city of New York and the state of New York the money it needs to provide a relief for all of our businesses and individuals, including workers and those workers that represent as well. Just as businesses are struggling, the city of New York as a whole is struggling. We're operating with a deficit. The state is operating with a deficit. And the federal government is the only one that can help trickle down those dollars so that Ariel can be able to effectively advocate and get those dollars to small businesses. Not saying that there aren't solutions that currently exist, because there are some solutions, right? Outdoor dining was one of those things that we did effectively, as Ariel mentioned, and try to help as many businesses as we can through that. There has been a slow reopening of indoor dining as well. Do I agree with the governor's recent move to cut the hours back to 10 p.m.? Absolutely not. There's no science that shows that the virus is more contagious after 10 p.m. So that was a little bit of a setback. But we need to bring all stakeholders to the table and think about what are the solutions to get us out of this. How can we operate safely? If you're able to bring 1 million students into school buildings, there's a way we can bring all New Yorkers to be able to come out, dine safely, and exist in these spaces as well. So let's have these real conversations. Let's treat nightlife as the important asset it is to the city of New York. And I'm willing and hoping to have those conversations because, as you mentioned, the workforce is affected as well. You have hundreds of thousands of workers who depend on hospitality, who depend on nightlife to have their doors open so they can put food on the table. I can't tell you how many times I hear from the creatives as well, performers, dancers, musicians who have no venues to play in because all these spaces are closed as well. And they themselves are relying on the state to provide them with unemployment insurance. They're relying on the federal government to pass another relief package. So again, this all comes down to the federal government coming through, doing their job so that the other levels of government can do what they can to help support the people who need it most.
Thanks, Rafael. I appreciate those thoughts, and I think it actually sets up a question I wanted to ask Adi to bring her into this as well. We're thinking talking a lot about both the long-standing challenges facing nightlife and also the unique challenges that this pandemic represents. But I think it needs to be kind of stated bluntly that a crisis that is taking this disproportionate toll on communities of color in so many ways is also affecting nightlife with a similar disproportionate impact. And I think most importantly, if the city as a whole, and I think it is wrestling with how can New York recover equitably? How do you build back in ways that are more inclusive? It would be one thing if we could just get in a time machine and go back to February. But the reality is, and our own research at the Center for Urban Future has borne this out, when it comes to jobs, when it comes to small businesses, when it comes to entrepreneurship, when it comes to culture and nightlife, in all of these different ways, the city we had in February had some really serious problems. It was not equitable. It was not fair. And access to all of these opportunities was not distributed equally across the city. And so, Adi, I wanted to ask you about this because you created Party Blackly in part to help build capacity for Black and Brown creatives and artists, here in New York City to intentionally hold events in spaces that are Black owned. Why did that matter to you at the time that you created this initiative? How important is this now that we're having a conversation about rebuilding nightlife more inclusively than it's been in the past?
And for having me. So once again, My name is Addie, and I created Party Blackly as a way to really bridge the gap between two communities that I've been a part of. I'm an artist, a songwriter, and what I noticed is within my community of independent artists, particularly Black artists, there's a lot of support, a lot of really good turnout for events, and things of that nature. I noticed the gap, though, however, in some of my interests as it pertained to community. I remember a couple of months, well, actually last year, I saw that that Old Tababo had been raided, and that was just really, really tough for me to see as somebody who's consumed and utilized this space as an artist, as a creative, as a member of the community, and not being really fully aware of how I can be a part of the solution. And so I thought of it as an opportunity to really bridge the gap between this artist community of people who come out to support shows, to support independent artists and music, as a way to bring that audience to these issues, to the needs of Black-owned and Brown-owned businesses, as a way to support them. What I noticed is that with a lot of community organizing and grassroots mobilizing efforts, sometimes turnout isn't always that strong, but leveraging the creative community and the fact that people want to be entertained, just getting those people involved, I think is going to really go a long way. And I think someone said earlier on the panel that, you know, we're New Yorkers, we don't wait around for people to solve our problems. And so being resourceful and creative is really all that we're about, and just figuring out unique ways to bring those communities together.
Thanks, Addie. I really appreciate that. And I think, you know, Deanna, in particular, what you've done to help mobilize the city's creative communities to create networks of mutual support is so powerful. We've seen this in so many ways. You know, the fund that you helped to start, but as well as so many mutual aid networks and local community networks, artists helping artists, and a real outpouring of support within the community. But I guess it makes me question or think about the role that the policymakers need to play in all of this. I think many artists that I've spoken with have said, you know, we feel like the silver lining of this crisis has been the outpouring of support from within our communities, but we want to see a lot more from our elected officials, from government, to step up and play a bigger role. And so I'd like to ask all of you, maybe this is just a jump ball for the whole group, but you know, we've got some big changes coming to New York. Mayoral, we're all still shell-shocked from, you know, last Tuesday, but we've got a mayoral race that's in full swing right now. We're going to have a new mayor of New York City next year. So many council seats are open, state Senate and assembly seats. There's a lot of potential future elected officials out there that are searching for ideas right now, that are looking for, what should I be championing? How can we build back a more inclusive economy? So I'd love to just throw this out to anybody who wants to jump in, and maybe everybody does. You know, if you could speak to the next mayor of New York City, or these future elected officials that will be representing your district or your borough, what would you want those folks to be doing right now? What do we need to be doing more of in terms of the immediate response to this crisis? What are some things that have driven you crazy about the way that the city treats nightlife that you'd like to change on a deeper level? I'm open to anybody who wants to jump in, but I'd love to hear from all of you on, you know, what should the next mayor do to really champion nightlife in a bigger way? Sure. Yeah.
It's my hand. I have a few thoughts on that. Of course I do. It'd be really amazing if there was a program that would somehow, like a fresh start program, because we were raided, we were over policed, and I have minuscule fines that are now, the interest rates are so crazy, I can't afford to pay certain things, and they don't go away. And some of them I thought were closed, and they're like, whatever, a restart program. Let's like clean off the debt so that I can just have a clear point of view and just go ahead. I don't want to have this like feeling like I'm being dragged down by old debt from a ridiculous raid from 2 years ago. And COVID should be enough of a reason to just trust that whoever's trying to get through it has the best intentions of the community. So that would be super interesting if we can come up with something to that effect. Also, reanalyzing the way that the tax system is set up for small businesses such as bars and restaurants, because by the time we see the dollar, it's like at 30% of what it was when it started. Now, you know, these extra sales tax on top of the liquor tax, on top of every other ridiculous tax that you could even think about. Maybe there's just one hub for fees, and that's it, because you'd be surprised how many things just prop up and I didn't know I was accountable for that. And I am a pretty smart person, so it's kind of alarming that I can't get a grip on certain things, because within all of these departments, the left hand doesn't speak to the right hand, or this was the DOT and not the DOB or the the DOH. So trying to figure out how to streamline that process. And overall, I think the biggest thing, and I don't know if this, and I think this is something closer to what Rafael Espinal may have up his sleeve down the road, is creating some sort of a pension plan or a fund so that we're not dealing with this again. There's so many creatives within nightlife. Like, everyone steals from nightlife. Brands, music, everything comes from nightlife culture. Why are we scraping to get paid? Why are we scraping by? Why isn't it more balanced? When I know that, because I also work in brand and marketing during the day, that these are people that are coming in like, oh, I like this song. They're going to steal a version of that to put it in an ad. Like, why isn't there a more balanced ecosystem?
Great, thanks, Deanna. Anybody else want to jump in on this question about, what else should be on the next mayor's agenda if they are serious about supporting New York City's nightlife and economy?
Hi.
Sure, Michael.
Just to jump in, completely 1,000% agree with Deanna. There are so many interests and bills and taxes that we deal with as nightlife operators and owners that needs to be addressed, especially, I think, when you really go to the grassroots levels of small business owners and seeing like, okay, this is what we are making. There should be some cap on some of the amounts, because we're paying the same amount of taxes that larger companies like Dwayne Reed or other places for sales tax. There has to be a balance. And I think, it would be great for our officials to start to look at that and really create some kind of support for us as small operators. And this may be with wishful thinking and naive thinking as an operator, but again, going back to grassroots mentality, I think that there also needs to be some kind of rent relief fund for commercial businesses, especially if your revenue is a certain amount. There can be like, okay, if you made under $1 million cap, we can support you as you paid taxes for the last 5 years, good amount of state taxes. Here's a rent relief. Some rent relief for the next 2 months. That 2 months saved will take care of staffing and will take care of other necessities, such as building decks, supporting, whoever it is, the cleaning people, or supporting our electric bills. Like, these are real issues that we deal with as a day-to-day that these kind of support can help us with. And I think it's just not there, and it's not really addressed. When you have the mayor waking up the next day just throwing out new rules, he's not really considering these moving parts, and I think that needs to be addressed for whoever else is in place. And that's it.
Rafael, any thoughts on unfinished business from your time in the council? Are there things that you wish you'd gotten done, or that you'd like to see your former colleagues run with in the months ahead?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think Diana and Mora brought up great points, and I think those are points that should really be taken into consideration moving forward by whoever takes office next year. I also had a bill that I put in before I left, and it was dubbed the Agent of Change bill. And the idea of the legislation is that it takes nightlife into consideration when the city is rezoning communities or talking about development as a whole. A lot of these small venues and spaces run into an issue when the city decides to allow residential developments to be built around them. Because those same developments leads to residents calling 311 and prompting the police and prompting all these agencies to come and enforce upon them. So why not create this new rule in that if the city is going to allow development to next to an existing space, that the developer has the onus is on him to make sure his windows have the proper amount of insulation, there's enough soundproofing, so that the new residents that move into the neighborhood do not find that space that was so critical to the entire community as the nuisance. Because in reality, at the end of the day, the building's a nuisance, right? So it's an idea of like, how do we rethink about how we build our city moving forward, so that we can respect the existing infrastructure that we have there, the businesses that are continue to be there, while allowing for the new folks to move into the community. Because you look at the numbers, you'll see that and what we also seen is that gentrification actually has spurred a lot of 301 complaints against a lot of venues of color, especially, and that all ties into development. having respect to the businesses that currently exist, that have existed for many years. And I believe that bill will help alleviate a lot of those issues moving forward. So it's the agent of change. It's a concept that's been spoken about in a lot of nightlife communities across Europe. And it's something that I introduced here in New York, and hopefully the next mayor can take that as part of his policy platform.
Thank you, Rafael. Ariel, can I ask you actually a similar question? Thinking about not only the immense task that faces you and the city right now in terms of stabilizing the losses that nightlife is experiencing right now, but really to this question about how can nightlife be built back more equitably, more fair, more inclusively than before. I'm curious what your priorities are for the road ahead. I mean, I know that there's so much on your plate just to kind of stanch the bleeding, but when it comes to ways that the city and state can work together to make this rebuilding process inclusive, what would you like to see happen next?
Well, obviously, this is a really unusual time, and we wouldn't want to call it an opportunity, but the reality is that with so many venues closed and in this very strange situation that we're in, there is an opportunity for us to really start to address all the issues that there were pre-COVID, all the reasons why this office was created. And I sort of put it like you can't change the tires on a moving car. The car, in essence, has stopped at this moment. And so we really have this moment in time to take a look at what was and how we can recover and renew the industry that is more equitable, more accessible, and more fair. The office was created to essentially decriminalize the industry, to make sure that it is seen as the economic engine, the cultural engine, to get it the respect and support that it needs. As far as the equitable issue, I mean, I would love to be able to continue the conversation with Addie and really see how, and this is a conversation that we've really already had and started on, how do we really address race in nightlife, door policies, booking, hiring. This is an opportunity that we can really just start to have a conversation and discuss best practices to make sure that when we restart and recover, that we are doing it in a way that is more conscious and more fair for everyone. In regards to the March operations that everyone has been bringing up, even as a former operator, I was marched on often at Sutra Lounge. And now, because of the city council that created new legislation to create a March report, the Office of Nightlife is responsible for gathering all of the agency information about what has historically not been a recorded operations. We didn't know when they happened, how many happened, why they happened. Now the Office of Nightlife creates a March transparency report every 6 months so that we can really start to understand when these marches happen, why they happen, and if they should happen. But we couldn't really make those moves and decisions without the data and the transparency. And that's another way that the Office of Nightlife is working to ensure greater fairness and support, and how we can make those changes and change those tires. And really, at the end of the day, all of the brilliant ideas that Diana has, and even with Rafael Espinal's Agent of Change, this is the purpose of our office, is to be that liaison of the good ideas, on how to recover should be coming from the industry. They should not be coming from some offices upstate or, down at City Hall. We should be delivering the good ideas that are coming, that are emanating, help to formulate them and help to introduce them into the system, to create systemic change. We don't want to just play a game of whack-a-mole and be like, fix this here, fix this there. We have to change it from the foundation. And so it's not just that office has a seat at the table in the government, but me sitting here now is the government having a seat here with you to hear what you have and to deliver that. And actually, in the coming weeks, probably first thing in the new year, we'll be delivering a recommendation report on what we foresee as the trajectory of this office as the first office of Nightlife Director for whomever may take it on for decades to come. What are the priorities of this office? What is the trajectory, and why is it important? So that's what, I'm really here to do, is to hear these ideas and make sure we deliver it.
Thank you, Ariel. That's just great. And I'm just going to turn to our audience now. Somehow the time has blown by and we only have about 10 minutes left, and there's lots of great questions. So I'm going to start to share a few of those. One, I think that really applies to our venue owners and operators on the panel. And one of our audience members asks, when you were just starting up your businesses, what were the resources you wish you had?
I can answer that. I think for me personally, having some people who are other business owners, small business owners in the community to help guide me would have been great. Thankfully, I'm a native New Yorker and Brooklynite, so I did have a wonderful resource of friends who kind of just helped me along, but they weren't in the industry. So I think having a nice group, and kind of mentioning what Deanna mentioned, maybe having like a portal or something that can help other aspiring operators tap into, because and we're definitely open to seeing other small businesses, especially minority and women-owned businesses, thrive in this time. We're here and we're ready. And I think that would have been amazing for me to have that as a little leg up when I first started, rather than figuring things out as I went.
To piggyback on that, I think she's right, 100%, the portal or some master checklist, because even though I had a master checklist, then to find out like BMI wanted my money too, and ASCAP wanted my money. So like, there's just also other things that it just should be one master checklist. And if you're not on it, you're not getting my money. So trying to figure that out. And you're right, the support system, and then understanding how to navigate the community board, because, we didn't touch upon that, but apparently like every new business has to go in front of the community board for approval. And each community board yields different weights. And so trying to figure out what it is you have to say to them to be in their good graces is super important.
That's helpful. Thanks. Yeah, Ariel, please.
One of the first years of business I attended to when the office was created was to create a one-stop shop website that has all of the links from all of the different city agencies that really cherry pick the information that you need, offer guidance on the community boards. I sat on Community Board 3 on the Liquor Licensing Committee for almost 7 years. And after I left board, I also was a consultant on how to do that. And so the website we have now is a living, breathing site that changes all the time, especially now with COVID. nyc.gov/nightlife. We're actually going to be making a lot more changes in the next week or two, but it is meant to be that one-stop government standpoint on how to navigate that system. So I just wanted to put that out there.
That's great. Thank you for that. A few other questions from our audience. One is really a kind of a comment suggestion I think is interesting. Could neighborhood folks be hired, paid to do community care rather than working as for-hire bouncers? And I think, for whoever asked that question, there's some interesting models out there right now of how cities are mobilizing their out-of-work residents to direct towards some of the COVID relief efforts. In Birmingham, Alabama, there's a BAM Strong initiative, for instance, that's helping out-of-work folks, become contact tracers and community health workers, and eventually to kind of retrain for other jobs that may open up. At the Center for Urban Future, we put forward the idea of mobilizing states out-of-work artists to help market local venues to New Yorkers, sort of like a miniature version of a Works Progress Administration type of campaign to put artists back to work. But I think interesting suggestion there for helping some folks transition into other employment. One of the other questions that we have from our panelists, and I'll maybe tack something onto this. The question is, how can urban planners within and outside city government support nightlife and promote it as an economic engine? And I would maybe add to that, we have a lot of planners tuning in right now. What should the city be thinking about when it comes to zoning and rezoning processes in nightlife? And in particular, we've seen that there's been tension over some of the parts of the city that maybe are best suited to generate new nightlife venues in industrial areas, like in East Williamsburg and Bushwick. But of course, there's tensions there, not only with residents, but especially I think in industrial areas with manufacturing jobs and other sources of employment that have traditionally been a backbone of employment for folks with some, barriers to other types of work. So how do you navigate some of those tensions? I think it's an interesting question for everyone, and we only have a few minutes left, but thoughts for how planners can integrate or advocate for nightlife moving forward?
I mean, Raphael, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but there are a lot of city council hearings and the mayor's office of city planning that has Euler processes and city hearings about how zoning works and recommendations on particular projects. And I don't think enough people who are pro nightlife are involved in the conversations about the actual projects that are on the table. I think they should be with the local city council hearings and be in tune with what's happening at the Department of City Planning, and don't get involved theoretically. Find the hearings and the projects that they can contribute to. Would that seem right?
Rafael, to piggyback on that, because I would love your perspective on this, and you were a real leader in the rezoning that took place in East New York, which brought a lot of affordable housing as well as jobs to the neighborhood. Should the city be more open-minded about encouraging or allowing nightlife uses in, for instance, manufacturing or industrial zones?
Well, I would say this. One of the reasons why this tension, do you hear me now? You guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. I would say one of the reasons that there's so much tension is because of the current zoning that exists. When we talk about the Cabaret law and the repeal of that law, while on paper that law was eradicated, dancing is still only legally confined to heavy manufacturing areas in the city. So nightclubs have no other choice but to be able to exist in those same spaces in which these manufacturing businesses exist. So the second part of the second chapter and the final chapter of the Cabaret law and the effects of it is changing zoning to allow for dancing to occur in other parts of the city. For example, and I will say this: if you're someone who went dancing outside of a manufacturing zone, you're technically breaking the law. So we have to make sure that zoning is being talked about in a wider lens. There's a lot of commercial districts that exist in communities. There's a lot of overhead L lines in many communities that produce just as much noise as a nightclub would. So the city has to sit down and rethink about its zoning across all 5 boroughs and look at opportunity zones in which they can relieve the pressure for those heavy manufacturing areas and allow them to exist in other parts of the city, so that won't continue to be a point of tension for 2 industries that provide so much for our city. And I encourage anyone who's in here and is studying zoning or works in one of these organizations that look at urban planning. Let's take nightlife very seriously. New York City is known for its nightlife. We're the cultural capital of the world because of the culture, the music, the venues that we're able to create here. It's just as important as any other piece that gets our city moving. And without nightlife, New York City wouldn't be the city it is today, and it wouldn't be the city people want to live in tomorrow. So this is the time that we start having this conversation on a real level and start making changes moving forward.
Well, Raphael, thank you so much. I think it's a perfect note for us to end on. Unfortunately, we're totally out of time, but I want to thank all of you for joining us for this great discussion. So many interesting ideas and interesting perspectives. Thank you to Tara and Mariah for organizing this event. To DivCom and the whole committee, as well as to all of everyone who's tuned in. It's just, I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you today.
All right, thank you all.
Thank you all.
I also just wanted to plug that I will be DJing the happy hour which is happening in about half an hour, but there's closing remarks. So we will see you all in the auditorium for closing remarks. And yeah, if you guys want to come check me out, the beverage of your choice, mine will be water, but you know, whatever, if you want to dance, we're gonna have a good time. This has been an awesome conference as always. So thank you, Hindsight, for letting us put this together. This is what we really want to make sure that this is a conversation that we have like ongoing, because nightlife is so important in New York City, around the world, but especially in New York City as far as culture goes. I mean, it's invaluable, and we need to make sure that we protect and support it.
Thank you.
All right, and thank you to our panelists.
Thanks,
Thank you so
everyone.
much, guys.
Right.
You guys.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Y'all
Thank
literally
you.
just wrote my thesis. This was like the seed of it. Was I'm supposed to be graduating this semester, so I appreciate your time so much.
Thank you
Yes.
so much.
Thank
Have a
you.
lovely, lovely weekend.
All right, you all too.
care.
Bye. Nice to see you.
All right. Where's my, how do I get out? Okay, here we go.
Bye, Marva.
Bye. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Take care.
You too.
Okay, I realized, I don't know if the chat saves. So I started saving the chat.
I copy and pasted.
Okay.
A lot. Like I try. They might be messy, and I also copy and pasted some of the questions too.
Yeah, that's what I know we didn't get to all the questions. So I just wanted to make sure that we have them and see if we can try to figure out how to.
I'll share you on this.
All right, cool. Yeah, just send me the doc. I did a very kind of weird cut and paste. So now they cut and paste people's. It wouldn't let. It's weird. I don't know. I did this app, but I'm like, oh, I feel like such a dinosaur using this. Okay. I gotta.
We have 11 people still on, so thank you for being here still.
Yeah. Oh,
all
no doubt.
the work and love went into this.
No doubt. I think I'm gonna go. I gotta finish setting up. So let me do that.
Take care. I'm driving upstate tonight, so I might miss a little bit, but I'll put you on until we leave.
Okay, cool. Okay, and show have fun.
Thank you for everything. I'm should give you a hug.
I know. High fives. High five.
I'll see you soon. Have a great set.
All right. Bye.
Bye.